Are you great? Hi, my name is Sandra Howard. I am a registered Maine whitewater and recreational guide for the last 22 years. I am a New Hampshire resident. I teach at Keene State College, and I live every summer up here at my family's property in Caratunk. Thank you for the opportunity to submit this sworn testimony as part of PUC case number 2017-00232. The discussion about need in CMP's application for a Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity begins with the headline, "The Massachusetts Public Need." CMP freely admits that the NECEC transmission project was developed specifically to respond to this need, the Massachusetts need. I wonder whether the legislators who authored Title 35A would ever had considered that a Maine utility would try to argue that a new huge transmission line should be based on the public need of anyone other than Maine ratepayers. And in this case, it wasn't the ISO or other energy planners that decided it was a good idea, it was politicians. Therefore, it's more accurate to say NECEC is being developed because of an out-of-state political need. NECEC isn't designed to help Maine ratepayers, and we don't need it to maintain reliability. It's a purely for-profit project. Whereas the Maine Power Reliability Program was specifically designed to strengthen the grid, NECEC is what is known as an elective transmission upgrade. It's just an investment. It's something they would obviously like to do, but it's clearly not something anybody needs them to do. We're extremely pleased the examiners have ordered CMP to submit a visual rendering of the 145-mile corridor. For the record, and it's in my packet I'll hand to you, are links to James Palmer's independent review on CMP's original visual impact assessment, which identifies scores of errors, inaccuracies, insufficient data presented in CMP's site application to the DEP and LUPC. I urge you to consider a requirement that CMP should solicit public input before performing its rendering, and that the final product should be subject to public comment and for professional peer review. This is a company that claims the Kennebec Gorge is not a real gorge, and that happy ever afters and colorful boats have a bigger environmental impact than a high voltage transmission line. I do not think we can trust CMP to produce an objective visual rendering on their own. Thousands of tourists escape to Western Maine to experience the natural beauty and to participate in rejuvenating recreational activities in a wilderness environment. That brand that Maine promotes to visitors across the globe would be permanently and forever changed, which would likely result in a further financial burden to Maine ratepayers with reduced tourism to this region. The PUC should also require that CMP provide an analysis on the impact NECEC would have on outdoor recreational tourism, the primary income by which many Western Maine residents and businesses rely on. The potential financial impact has not been addressed in any aspect of this proceeding. There's a strong local agreement among our over 3,200 members on the Say No to 145-mile transmission line through Maine Facebook group that no amount of money is worth unnecessary and massive destruction to one of the last contiguous forests east of the Mississippi River. By the way, all of us are volunteers. None of us are being paid to be here. We're here because we care. CMP has inflated the benefits of its proposal in order to gain public support and regulatory approvals. The PUC's own consultant, London Economics International, found that the actual ratepayer benefits are likely to be much lower than CMP's estimates. Other witnesses in this docket have presented compelling testimony about why even the correct number could even be much lower and how other impacts of the project could offset any benefits that might remain. Other overstated benefits include property tax revenues, which are addressed in the town of Caratunk's recent letter to rescind support of NECEC. One of the economic offsets is that if existing power generators need to close because of increased cost to transmit energy out of Maine, there could also be job losses and further reduction in property tax revenues statewide. Building an extension cord from Quebec through Maine will have a direct and potentially fatal impact on our biomass plants, one of our important local industries that supports jobs throughout Maine's forest economy. The closures would result in more job losses than the promised temporary NECEC jobs. We also need to consider that the promised jobs may not even support Maine's workforce. Construction contracts could likely be awarded to out-of-state workers. Another topic I'd like to address is Title 35A, Section 3132. In 2017, the legislator amended subsection 2D of the statute, which now says, in considering whether to approve or disapprove all or portions of a proposed transmission line, the Commission shall consider the results of an investigation by an independent third party of non-transmission alternatives to construction of the proposed transmission line. The investigation must set forth the total projected costs of the transmission line as well as the total projected costs of the alternatives over the effective life of the proposed transmission line. I've done my best to review the documents in the PUC case management system for public record, and there seems to be no discussion about this issue other than a fairly brief mention in the CMP application. When is the Commission going to address this issue? The law doesn't say the Commission may address it, it says you shall address it. This language seems very clear, and I'm disturbed we're having hearings before this analysis has been completed, especially since it appears to be an absolute legal requirement. It's a key issue that should be subject to public discussion. For example, on page 86 of Volume 1 of their certificate application, CMP says that a non-transmission alternatives analysis is not required in this case, but their logic is not convincing. Their first claim is that nothing can be cheaper since there are no costs to main customers, but reading through their record, it's clear that not everyone agrees with that statement. Unlucky consumers in Massachusetts will be paying for the line itself, but several interveners argue that any CEC could have unintended consequences that hurt customers in the long run. CMP has been accused of grossly overstating benefits, so how can we be confident they're not underestimating the true costs? CMP ignores the cost to Maine in ruining our pristine heritage. The next argument that CMP says is that since Massachusetts chose this specific project, there are simply no alternatives. I guess what CMP is saying is that the contract is set and we don't have any business in second-guessing the decisions of out-of-state politicians and utilities. But as you may know, more than 40 bidders responded to Governor Baker's RFP. The winning bidder, Northern Pass, failed to obtain regulatory approval, and here we are today. Massachusetts obviously has other options in the event any CEC is rejected as well. There are alternatives. I strongly encourage the PUC not to ignore this issue. It's clear the legislator wanted to make sure that intrusive power lines only get built when there are no other alternatives. I cannot understand how the fact that any CEC is being built for a Massachusetts public need exempts the Commission from looking at alternatives. How can a Massachusetts law possibly supersede a Maine law? I'd also like to direct you to subsection 5 of the statute. It says when the cost of the transmission and non-transmission alternatives are reasonably equal, the Commission shall give preference to the alternatives that produce the lowest amount of local air emissions, including greenhouse gas emissions. Note the preference for better alternatives from an environmental perspective, but also the emphasis on local air emissions, not Massachusetts air emissions. And finally, I direct you to subsection 6, which gives the Commission substantial latitude in making its determination. It says, in determining public need, the Commission shall, at a minimum, take into account economics, reliability, public health and safety, scenic, historic, and recreational values, state renewable energy generation goals, the proximity of the proposed transmission line to inhabited dwellings and alternatives to construction of the transmission line, including energy conservation, distributed generation, or load management. If approved, it's clearly questionable whether any CEC will reduce global CO2 emissions. While Massachusetts' effort to seek clean energy is admirable, we have serious concerns that this power is not so clean after all. Hydro-Quebec is obviously well aware of the studies that have been done, and the controversy around this issue is somewhat surprising. We haven't seen a competent analytical response from them at all, and I ask you to consider why that is. It goes without saying that there are lots of different ways that we as a state, a region, a society can meet important energy and environmental needs. It's also obvious that any CEC comes with a profound and irreversible cost to pristine natural resources. Look at the growth in solar energy, offshore wind, and untapped potential for energy efficiency. And consider the fact that any CEC is not the only way to get the job done. It's not our problem. The public demands that the Maine PUC require CMP to provide information from Hydro-Quebec to support their claims about clean energy, which currently lacks sufficient supporting data. I implore you not to agree to such huge costs to us, without thoroughly evaluating whether an extension cord through Maine is the only way to reduce carbon emissions or keep the lights on. Otherwise, the PUC is prioritizing another state's interests and avant-garde's corporate business interests over what is best for Maine consumers, Maine's businesses, and Maine's natural resources. In addition, I'd like to submit a series of public comments under the sworn testimony, and I am proud to submit 46 additional letters that have been given to me by their respective authors with permission to submit them as further evidence as part of my sworn testimony. These letters represent a letter from the Executive Director from Maine Rivers and 45 independent letters from residents of the following towns. And if I read them all to you, it would sound like a snowstorm cancellation list. But I would say that they represent various towns throughout Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, and New York. And I guess if we're talking about a storm, then we should think about the storm of the public is coming, because we say no to any CDC. Thank you.
While we were on the break, I had a request from Jennifer Poirier if she could please go, because she's got to leave. So I'm going to grant that, and I thank the others for being patient, but I want to let her play through before she has to leave. So Jennifer, come on up.
Thank you, and I won't take up too much time.
Did I pronounce your last name correctly?
Poirier, yes.
Great.
I have two copies here of my testimony because we have some pictures in there if you guys would like to follow
Okay.
along with what I'm saying here. Thank you. My name's Jennifer Poirier. I'm from Skowhegan, a lifelong Maine resident. And first of all, thank you for allowing us to have the time and the forum to submit our testimonies. You'll hear many testimonies of statistics, logistics, biodiversity, and proximity effects of the proposed corridor project, but I'm actually here to tell you a personal experience. Many decades ago, my husband was introduced to the great wilderness spanning the Spencer Road, and over time it's become our family's destination to enjoy the real wilderness of Maine. No cell phone service, no internet, no power. We've been able to hike the mountains, explore seemingly endless trails, kayak, canoe, and fish in the most quiet, picturesque ponds. We're able to fall asleep listening to the sound of the crystal clear creek flowing right behind us. Though it's rare to meet up with people at our favorite destinations, my family has been fortunate to build a friendship with a man who spends his summers off the Spencer Road and is very knowledgeable of the area. We've had history lessons, whether it be about fishing, homesteaders, logging, or even the POW camp. These aren't stories or experiences that you'll learn in a classroom. In his late 80s, this man will not only tell you where to find the sweetest berries in the area, but he's willing to actually dig a trench in a road to keep it from flooding in the rains. This tote road leads to some of the primitive camps that we take advantage of, and it will be obliterated by this corridor. See, the majority of people that visit this area care about it. If I go down the road and see the sign to number 5 mountain and it's fallen down, I pull over and I fix the rocks and straighten it up again. Done that twice this summer already. The folks here, they don't own all this land, but we care about it, genuinely. The first picture that you have in my packet for the presentation shows a view from the top of number 5 mountain. Just a couple of probably hundreds that I have over the years. My family's been known to make this hike several times a year. The views are breathtaking. You can see hills, forests, streams, rivers, so much beauty that is the real Maine. We hiked number 5 with our whole family, because our anniversary actually fell on the date of the solar eclipse. It was amazing. If you've never hiked number 5, I really suggest you do it before you make any decision on this. There'll be views, magnificent views that you've never seen and you wouldn't be able to see anywhere else. And I'll tell you, I have an 8-pound little dachshund. He does that hike probably 3-4 times a summer. If he can do it, you can do it. My next exhibit is some trails that we go through, seemingly untouched for years. You know, you can pick up berries, we take pictures, we just enjoy it. There's not many places that you can go in the state of Maine where you can see moose, deer, coyote, bear prints, all within like a 4-foot span. We saw it this year. You know, the big bear prints, this big. You could practically see where they were walking through. Where else can we go to do that? These animals, with this corridor going through, they're gonna be displaced. There's no doubt about it. They'll fall victim to this corridor. My attachment C shows some of the ponds that we're able to go through. Okay. Have you ever woken up, just walked down a quick little path to a pond and been able to see a cow moose and her calf grazing on lush water plants first thing in the morning? Things like that are going to change if this corridor goes through. You can canoe and kayak for hours and relax with nothing but nature. Okay. Look at these views. Look at them. Can you imagine in the background seeing 95-foot steel monopoles? What will that do to these views? The trout that we've caught in these ponds are the cleanest, best tasting trout that we've ever had. And the damage to the forest will surely have a devastating impact on these ponds as well. CMP will lead you to believe that the area that I speak of is a logging superhighway. It is a logging land that's active, but all the times that we've traveled the road, and I'm talking many times a month throughout the summer months and even in the winter too, we very seldom even pass a logging truck, maybe once or twice down the whole length of the Spencer Road. Here's some pictures of these roads. Some of the areas in the roads, you have to pull over to let somebody go by. You can't even get 2 people in there. So tell me it's a logging superhighway. They're proposing to cut a width minimum 300 feet, 500 feet in some areas. That's a football field length. That's how wide it's going to be, minimum. Picture it, 50 miles of forest, wider than a football field, gone forever. Forever. These beautiful landscapes will be permanently robbed of their scenic importance. And CMP does compare it to clearing the forest for harvesting, but there is no comparison. The forests harvested in these areas are replanted, and they're not touched for many, many years, so the animals, the trees, they all come back. They won't if this corridor comes through. The physical damage caused during construction and maintenance alone is completely irreversible. The decision that you're charged with making goes much deeper than energy, power, business, or even money. Those are not the attributes that attract people to Maine. They're not the things that our children look at when deciding whether or not they want to stay in Maine as adults or if they want to go somewhere else. It's because of the experiences that I've mentioned that our youngest son is now majoring in outdoor recreation and tourism here in Maine, and this untouched wilderness is where he wants his future. So what can we as adults offer future generations? I ask you, what kind of message do you want to send to the future of Maine? We can choose to keep these views flawless and the lands pristine. You cannot put a dollar value on these lands or the experiences that they offer. So I do implore you to reject New England Clean Energy Connect project. Keep this region clean and picturesque for my children, my grandchildren, and many generations to enjoy. Please listen to the people that respect and truly value these lands. This corridor is not good for Maine. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Next up is Carol Howard.
I thought it was just a sign-up sheet for everyone who was here.
Well-
So please, would you like to be removed from that?
Yes, please.
Okay. That was quick. Okay, so we've got Nancy E., and I'm not sure I'm reading this right. Is it Soul?
Hi, guys.
Nancy.
My name's Nancy Soul. I'm a registered Maine guide. I've been a registered Maine guide for 33 years, and a lot of these folks here know me. I've worked with one or two of them through the years, Boris 10, 12. I work for Moxie Outdoor Adventures right now. I have been working with them since 1993, and before that I worked with Cliff Stevens at North American Whitewater and Pete Dostey. I'm here to talk about the river, and it's not just the Kennebec River. I live in Liberty, Maine. I have the St. George River here and the Sheepscot River there, and I work up here. So, Kennebec River, Dead River, Sheepscot, St. George. There's a spur line that's going to go in right along the Sheepscot River. I'm going to be able to walk up to the top of the mountain near my house and look out there and see these 100-foot power plant poles that are going to run along the side of the Sheepscot River. Then I'm going to come up here to work, and I'm going to see, when I go to work on the river and I stop for lunch, wires strung across the river with great big orange balls on them. When I go back to where our base is on Lake Moxie, I'm going to hear the hum from across the street at the back of the property that Cliff Stevens owns, where this power line is going to run 300 yards behind us. If I walk over, say, up to Moxie Bald Mountain, which is right down the road from where I work, and I climb it, I'm going to be able to look from here all the way across the horizon, up and down mountains, around, back, through passes. I am going to see this transmission project. Maine led the nation in instituting the Clean Water Act in the 1970s. If any of you know the history, we led. Dirigo, we lead. Why would we want to go backwards? Why would we want to go from the upper Moose River Valley through the Kennebec watershed, the Sheepscot watershed, all of this, the Androscoggin River, it's all connected. Every stream runs into a brook, runs into a stream, runs into a pond, runs into a river, goes into the ocean. It affects it all the way down the line. This corridor that they want to put in is not just 53 miles up here. We're talking about 145, 150 miles, plus the spur line that they're going to stick in my backyard. They're going to be spraying pesticides to keep the growth down. They're going to have it run into the ground, into the water, and it's going to affect fish. It's going to affect animals. It's going to affect people, all the way to the ocean. So you're talking from the Canadian border all the way to where the watershed empties out into the Atlantic Ocean. Not just one little piece of Maine. I went to Massachusetts and spoke in front of the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities. The Massachusetts Global Warming Solutions Act requires them to have a percentage of their power come from green sources. Nowhere in their Global Warming Solutions Act wording does it say, turn your neighbors brown. Okay? This has no benefit for Maine. We don't get to tap into it. It's going to run by us and go straight to Massachusetts. They're going to tear up the forest. They're going to run across streams and brooks and ponds. They're not going to mitigate the damage. There's going to be water being warmed, the fish hatcheries. You know, for up here we talk about the brook trout. On the Sheepscot River, it's one of the last runs of native salmon on the East Coast. Wild native salmon. No development until you get down to Windsor to Wiscasset where they're going to put this. You know, I am just, from one end to the other, I'm going to see it at both ends of my life. It has no benefit for the state of Maine. We get nothing from this except destruction. Please say no. Thank you.
Next up is Ed Buzzell.